state of Israel. But as long as they call for our destruction, there's not much we can do with them.
We'll be right back with the Prime Minister of Israel after this. We're back with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of the State of Israel. Your coalition, we know this, has some right-wingers who don't agree with the notion of a Palestinian state. You have some difficulties. There are always inner politics going on. Is there any way, a pragmatic way, to bring you and the Kadima together?
Well, I've called for a national unity government. We actually formed one. I formed a Likud-Labor alliance, and I'm always happy to broaden it to people who want to serve the nation. But, you know, getting into the intricacies of Israeli politics would take a lot more than even a long program of Larry King. It's a subject of encyclopedic, you know, vantage.
Back to the difficulties. In May, Israeli forces stormed a ship on a humanitarian mission to Gaza. Several Turkish activists were killed. I don't know if have you ever publicly said that you were wrong to do this?
Well, we were definitely sorry about the loss of life, but I'll tell you what happened. First of all, why do we check ships that go to Gaza? Because we are concerned with the flow of the possible flow of weaponry into Gaza. We've had, as I said, thousands of rockets fired on us. I think that what people fail to recognize is that there were 6 ships. 5 of them were totally peaceful, and nothing of substance happened. Our Navy checked these ships, and we didn't have any incident. The 6th ship was very different. It had about 500 people on it, of which about 450 were peaceful people, but several dozen were activists of a very radical group that had apparently amassed steel rods, knives, communication equipment. They boarded differently from the other passengers. The other 450 passengers boarded in one port in Turkey. They went through security checks. These people boarded in another port in Istanbul. They didn't go through any security checks. They had their own communication equipment. They had their own steel pipes and things that they brought on board. And when our Coast Guard effectively wanted to check this ship and make sure that it behaved the way the other 5 did, they were brutally attacked. And you could see that in the films that were released. And our soldiers, our Navy people, were fighting for their lives. What would you do if the Coast Guard boarded a ship and the Coast Guard was brutally attacked by people who were, you know, clubbing them, knifing them, taking weapons from them, shooting at them? What do you think would happen? How do you think the American people would respond?
Okay, but how do you repair the damage with a state you need to be friendly, Turkey?
Well, you're quite right that Turkey and Israel had an important relationship. Turkey is a very important country in the Middle East. I think that the relationship began to deteriorate with a Turkish policy, a new policy that basically veers away from the West. I think Israel, what has happened with Israel is a result of that policy and not its cause. But nevertheless, I look for every opportunity to see if we can stop this deterioration and somehow get things back to normal or relatively normal. Last week, I authorized a meeting with one of my senior ministers and the Turkish foreign minister. They met in Zurich in the airport. I can't tell you that something positive came out of it, but I want to feel, as Prime Minister of Israel, that I leave no stone unturned in the quest for a broader peace and the quest of good relations with our neighbors. And even though it may not succeed right now, we'll keep trying.
Will you meet with Turkish leaders?
Sure.
We'll take a break. We'll be right back with more of the Israeli Prime Minister. Don't go away. Be very interested in your comments, Mr. Prime Minister, on the statements made by former American President Jimmy Carter. He called the incident with the ship, the attack on the ship, unprovoked and an illegal Israeli assault. He also says there's no way to realize a two-state solution while, quote, the people of Gaza remain isolated and deprived of basic human rights. How do you respond to President Carter?
Well, first of all, I think he's wrong on the incident. I described to you what happened, and
all right.
We regret the loss of life, but we don't apologize for our soldiers defending themselves, and I think that's obvious. Secondly, I think the people of Gaza are indeed incarcerated by Hamas. Third, I removed all the civilian closure that we had. That is the prevention of free flow of civilian goods, food, medicine, anything, toys. I actually changed a policy that I inherited from the previous government. It had put both a civilian closure on Gaza and a security closure. I said, we really have to be clear about our policy. Our policy is that weapons and war-supporting material don't go in, and everything else should go in. Food and everything else should go in. So I changed that policy, and I'm glad I did it because I think there's clarity and there's common sense in it. I'm sorry that not everyone can see that, but I think fair-minded people can see it and, in fact, do.
But does it pain you personally to have a former president of the United States be so critical of your country?
Well, I'm sorry he thinks that. I think the majority, the overwhelming majority of Americans see things differently. I think successive presidents, including this one, see things differently. And the important thing is to be true to the facts. The facts are that Israel was attacked from Gaza. The fact is that we had that Iran sends weapons into Gaza so they'd be fired on us. The fact is that this regime, Hamas, is holding an Israeli soldier that they kidnapped for 4 years. 4 years, this soldier, Gilad Shalit, has not been allowed to see anyone. They don't allow the Red Cross to visit him. This is a complete violation of international norms. And I think if anything bears condemnation, it is this inhumane terrorist regime. And I would hope that international condemnation is directed there. That's where it belongs, and not against Israel, a struggling democracy striving to live and to make peace with its neighbors. It should not be condemned. It should be encouraged to defend itself and also to make peace.
Does it concern you, Mr. Prime Minister, that Israel's image around the world is poor? You're not in high regard at the UN. You seem to be, from a public relations standpoint, PR standpoint, in trouble.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm appearing on the Larry King Show. There is a difference between perception and reality. The reality is that the people of Israel yearn for peace, pray for peace. We've not had a day's peace, a day of complete peace since the founding of the state in 1948. We know the costs of wars. There's many Israelis have suffered it. I've suffered it personally. I've lost a brother in the war between the wars known as terror. Many of my friends have lost direct relatives. We know the cost of war. We know the sorrows of war, and we know the blessings of peace. And yet at the same time, we forged a peace agreement with Egypt. We forged a peace agreement with Jordan. And throughout these years, we built a robust economy. Israel is a beehive of creativity and innovation. The economy is growing. It's one of the best performing economies in the developed world. There's a story there that doesn't get told, both of our desire for peace, our sacrifices for peace, and our building of a better reality. And I can envision, if we had the kind of peace I envisioned with the Palestinians, we could see what we're seeing now in the West Bank, this great prosperity, envelop the entire region. I think Israel could make a tremendous contribution to the well-being of its Arab neighbors, and I think that peace could bring for our children, my children, and their children, something beyond their imagination. It could be a different life, a different reality, and I'm prepared to do it. I'm prepared to move and lead my people to that peace, I need a partner on the other side.
When we come back, we'll talk about Iran with the Prime Minister of Israel right after this. Mr. Prime Minister, Iran, how much do you, if the word fear apply, how much do you fear their intentions? What's the worst case scenario to you?
Well, we've learned in history and in Jewish history to take seriously those who call for our extermination. A lot of people in the past century, the 20th century, didn't take such calls seriously, and we know the awful price that was paid by the Jewish people and later by the rest of humanity for not taking seriously these kinds of statements. The fact that after the Holocaust, a sovereign government at once denies the Holocaust and calls for the destruction of the Jewish state is just outrageous. Do we take it seriously? Absolutely, we take it seriously. We also know that Israel was founded to defend the Jewish people, so we reserve always the right to defend ourselves.
And would that, if you determined that they had nuclear capability, would you attack Iran?
You know, I've taken note of President Obama's statement that he's determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. I see that sanctions have been adopted, modest sanctions at the UN, but more robust sanctions recently by the Congress, was signed by the President the other day. I hope other nations follow America's lead in this. Will it be enough to stop the Iranian nuclear program? I can't tell you, Larry. I do tell you that the President has said that all options are on the table, and I do tell you that Israel always reserves the right to defend itself. That's the purpose for which it was founded, to defend Jewish lives.
Assuming Israel has never said it has nuclear weapons, but the world thinks it does, why is it okay for Israel to have nuclear weapons and Iran not to have nuclear weapons? Hypothetically, if Israel has them, why is it okay for them to have them and the other not?
Well, we said we wouldn't be the first to introduce these weapons into the Middle East, but equally, we're not threatening to destroy any country. We don't seek the destruction of any country or of any people. We don't say that an entire people has to be wiped off the map of the earth. We don't have such intentions. I think all nuclear proliferation is bad, but some of it is a lot worse. It does make a difference whether Holland has nuclear weapons or the Ayatollah regime that sponsored terrorism and calls for Israel's destruction, whether it is nuclear weapons. And I think there's a common understanding right now, something that I spoke about 16 years ago, 14 years, to be precise, 1996, when I was elected 14 years ago. Spoke before the joint session of the U.S. Congress. I was just elected Prime Minister. And I said that the greatest threat facing humanity is that Iran would acquire nuclear weapons. Some eyebrows were raised at the time. And I can tell you 14 years later that most of the world's leaders today agree with this. There is a question of the distance between understanding and effective action. And that is the ultimate test of leadership and of history.
Would you ban all nuclear weapons throughout the world? Would you ban nuclear weaponry entirely?
Well, that's beyond my scope. I mean, this is a worthy cause, but it's a very complicated issue, and I'm sure you realize that that the most important thing is preventing the most dangerous weapons in the world from falling into the hands of the most dangerous regimes. And this is what we really are facing today. We're facing the prospect that people who wantonly talk about destruction, who deny the Holocaust, who sponsor terrorism everywhere, who shoot their own citizens on the sidewalk. You know, they lie there. You remember that young woman lying there, choking in her own blood. These people who have absolutely no inhibitions about the use of violence and brutality would acquire the weapons of mass terror, the ultimate mass terror weapon, which is atomic bombs. That's a very, very dangerous development for all of us.
Would Would there be any